Hello and welcome to another episode of Doc. I'm Ian, your host, and this week I'm joined again by Matt.
Hello.
This week we'll be talking about Beyond the Mat. It's a 1999 documentary which follows a group of professional wrestlers. I'm not gonna lie, I'm completely unfamiliar about wrestling. I mean, I remember watching it a bit on Saturdays, like when I was in school. I think it was Saturdays. I don't know. I'm not too sure when it was on.
More than likely. Did you have Sky One?
Yeah, and it was like a kind of omnibus. Was it not? Did they do that?
Yeah,
as wrestling.
Yeah. Sort of like a weekly roundup kind of thing.
Yeah, and I remember playing. Was it WrestleMania? Is it WrestleMania 64? Like,
mate, the best wrestling game ever.
And
I
I remember
No Mercy for the 64. Great games.
Oh. I remember just being rubbish, and like it was me and a couple of friends, and I would just be like absolutely getting ruined in the corner. I can't even remember who I chose because I didn't really know anybody's names. All I can think of people back then is like I don't know, The Rock.
He's pretty famous now.
Yeah, he looks so different now, doesn't he, compared to his documentary? Yeah. He's like, even his voice is completely different, I think.
Yeah.
But whereas my knowledge of wrestling is almost non-existent, Matt is, quite strong. Tell us about it, Matt.
So I basically grew up watching professional wrestling. Back in the day, my parents used to be quite big fans, like before I was born and that. And it was quite big in England. They used to have a Saturday show called World of Sport, and most families in the UK were watching it. It was pretty huge. They do stuff, I think, in like York Hall and stuff like that. But yeah, my parents would go to them shows. So then, whilst bringing me and my siblings up, we kind of got pulled into that and started watching wrestling ourselves. At the time, wrestling at the time, it was very, very, very cartoon-like characters. Almost like, being a kid, it was like comic book heroes jumping off of the page and onto the screen. And it was just, like as a kid watching it, that's where I fell in love with it. And then as I got older, I suppose a certain degree of it'd become kind of normal for me to watch it every week, like it would be for The Simpsons or something like that. So I carried on watching. And as I got older, it was like the business started changing. The professional wrestling business started changing. And like sort of when I went into my teen years was when it came away from that kind of cartoony aspect and became more kind of like PG-14 or TV-14. So aimed at a slightly older demographic, but it kind of fit in to my age at the time. So, it kind of went hand in hand. But yeah, I've just never really looked back, always been a fan. I get all the things of, some people it's not their cup of tea. But yeah, for me, I've always enjoyed it. It's a form of theatre to me.
Yeah, which brings me to my first question from the documentary. At the beginning of the documentary, the director, he basically acts like he's kind of almost like has like a deep dark secret of watching wrestling. And I was wondering, why do people feel ashamed to say they watch wrestling?
For a lot of people, it stems, or at least in my case, it kind of stemmed from like being a kid, and there'd be a lot of kids when, say when you're in your first school and that, a lot of kids were into it. And then as people got older, they fell out with it, or they'd hear that it was like air quotations fake, and they'd be like, oh well, why would I watch it then? But then for someone who does still watch it and still enjoyed it, I suppose it could be kind of embarrassing constantly having that conversation with people and feeling like you had to defend something that you enjoyed. Like I think there's a few times as a kid where where you do that, and then after a while you'd be like, do you know what? It's easier just not to tell people that I like it, because then I don't have to go into some defense on why I enjoy something. That's probably the reason I would think that a lot of people kind of keep it on the down low, that they have a passion for professional wrestling. That was certainly the case with me at points in my life. Whereas now I'm kind of like, I'm at an age now where, if it's something I like and it doesn't hurt anyone, then what's the problem? We all like different things. So I'm not as reserved these days to tell people, if they say, oh, what are your hobbies, what are your interests? But yeah, definitely as a kid, I think it was because you constantly felt like you had to defend something you were interested in.
I don't know. I feel like it's, as you said, it's like theater, isn't it? It's kind of, it is a sport with almost like a predetermined outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But all those moves and all the things they have to do, the I don't know, stunts, I guess you call them, or like moves. They're all real. Like, they can go wrong unless everybody's on the right page. I mean, I don't know if there is any wrestling out there where it's not predetermined, or
I mean, there's a style of wrestling called shoot wrestling, and you'll find that, like, if you ever delve deep into the pro wrestling world, there's almost like a language that wrestlers use, and kind of clued up fans like use, and a term for a clued up fan would be a smark, SMARK, because every fan is a mark. Wrestling originated from like carnivals and circus shows, and because especially way back in the day, although it was predetermined, people didn't know that. People thought it was as real as boxing. So like they would call the ticket buyers, they would call them marks. They're our marks. They're the ones we need to draw in. They're the ones who are going to believe that this is real. So a phrase has been coined of fans that are kind of deep in the knowledge of pro wrestling would be called smarks, smart marks. But yeah, so I would class myself as that. It used to be kind of a derogatory term thrown at people, but with the age of the internet, pretty much every wrestling fan is a smart fan nowadays, because everything is out there, through social media, and just a lot of the secrets of the industry are out now. Like, fans are aware. But yeah, so there is real wrestling, and it's called shoot wrestling, and that would mainly be submission wrestling. What people say. Sorry.
Why is it called shoot wrestling?
So it would be called shoot, so it's hard to explain, but shoot basically means real. Like, in wrestling language, shoot means real, and work means like fake. Like, so if you're working a crowd, means that you're wrestling your predetermined match, but their believability in it is, even though they know it's a work, but it suspends their disbelief for the moment of that match. So you're working that crowd. And a worked fight is a predetermined fight, whereas a shoot fight is like, it's for real. Like, if you were to shoot in a interview, you'd be shooting from the hip. So it's like an old gunslinger term as well. Yeah. I'm sure it goes even deeper than my knowledge of it. But yeah, so shoot wrestling, like, you don't see it as much these days. But, back in the 80s and, even way before that, shoot wrestling was a thing. And it was less theatrical and more kind of just like, you're trying to put your opponent into a hold in which they can't get out of, and the pain is so much that they would have to say, I submit, like, I give up, I can't go on.
Oh, like they teach in schools and like PE and.
Well,
I mean, we don't.
That's more amateur wrestling.
Okay.
So again, that's different still. That's about pinning someone to the mat. So you're not actually really trying to hurt someone. Whereas shoot wrestling is like you could do some real damage. So I guess you could kind of put it next to, like, say, UFC, where, you know, UFC is a pretty brutal sport, but still there's rules. They wear gloves, and you compare that to kind of like you know, boxing without gloves, you know, bare knuckle boxing, whereas obviously that could do a lot more damage, and there's no rules to it, kind of thing.
Let's get into the actual documentary. So the documentary starts off with the director discussing how he grew up like watching wrestling, and how you know, he wanted to explore what kind of man bashes another man's skull into a post for a living, or like what kind of father would do this for a living.
What makes these people tick, basically.
Yeah, what makes them tick. And we end up at the WWF headquarters, which I guess has changed name, because I remember back in the day, WWF, like World Wildlife Foundation or something like that, or
yeah, they actually took the World Wrestling Federation to court over the name, which I always found very strange, because it had been like the World Wrestling Federation had been called the WWF for so long, and obviously so had the World Wildlife Fund, and they'd always seemed to have got along before. But I don't know if maybe more in the kind of age of the internet coming around was when you'd have domain names and things like that, so it could be made, you know, someone want to help a panda out, goes and sees some man bashing a dude's head with some steel chair or something. Not what they want to see. So I think it probably had something to do with that.
Yeah, but obviously, like, I didn't know if it was something to do with when we first go into the office, we see Vince McMahon, which I definitely know from back in the day of watching as a kid. Like, I remember seeing him like kind of looking on screens or like TVs and be like, "What's going on in that ring?" And he would like kind of, you know, come down and sort stuff out.
Yeah, yeah.
And
so
this,
like
his whole family as well. Like
he basically started out in the WWF kind of as a commentator, and at the time, being a kid, I had absolutely no idea that he was actually the owner of the WWF. He was the CEO of the company. You know, as a kid, I was just like, oh, he's just this outlandish commentator. And then I kind of grew up and found out, like, wow, he actually owns the company. And when you look at the history of the company and how far it's come, like, he's done some incredible things.
Would you class him as a wrestler?
He has had wrestling matches.
Yeah.
None of them have been really great. He's not athletic at all.
No.
I'd say more kind of, especially in terms of WWE now / WWF. I'd say more. I'd class him as an on-screen character at times. That's how I would describe him. Yeah,
so he has found his next big break, next big wrestler in some guy called Darren Drozdov, who goes by the name of Puke in this. Like, that's what Vince christens him, Puke. And I remember watching this and I was like in disbelief, because I was thinking, he saw a potential superstar. He seen, like, you know, he was like, yeah, you're what was it? Like, you're what WWF material and stuff. And I was like, realistically, could you show that on TV? Like, you know, some guy puking up over the ref or the, you know, the person he's fighting against.
It's pretty disgusting.
I was thinking, like, there's no way this could have gone anywhere. Like, like the whole act of him puking on command. He does seem like an athletic guy. Like he does have like a wrestler build, which obviously he is a wrestler.
Well, he came from football before that, I believe. American football.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it was just like collegiate level or if it was like professional. I can't remember. I think it says in the doc. I just can't. It's not in my head at the moment.
So I don't know. I was just like thinking, there's no way he could have gone absolutely anywhere with this. And he's like ringing his mum saying like, "Oh, mum, you can be so proud of me." But then again, if he got signed by, the corporation and stuff, he's gonna be like making an absolute fortune.
Yeah.
Like from what I can tell, he must have some kind of rights overall. There must be like, I don't know. I don't know if he gets like any toy rights, if there is toy rights, or
yeah. I mean, most wrestlers like you'd get like a certain percentage of like merch sales and stuff like that, and that's I suppose what comes into kind of the negotiation aspect of a big contract like that. If you've got room to negotiate, of course. If you're just like, wow, I can't believe I've been, chosen for this position, then you're probably going to take what you can get. But if you have room to negotiate, you can negotiate, higher percentages of your merch sales and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, I just kind of wondered where it would end up. I mean, if you got Puke and like they've literally just called him Puke, like, is there a scat man? Is there a... Like,
trust me, around that time, I mean, or just before that time, like what you would name that, or what like the kind of wrestling lingo for that is that's his gimmick. Like, so whereas you would say in a play or in a film or a TV show, like that's someone's character. Well, this is their gimmick. This is the gimmick we're going to stick on you. So you could like for most people, whether they're big wrestling fans or not, will probably have heard of a wrestler called The Undertaker before. And his gimmick is that he's kind of the undead. He's a dead man. Like, he's this dead man, old school Undertaker. Like, and that would be his gimmick. It wouldn't be Mark Calloway, the actual person playing the character. So it's just a bit more to the kind of theatre aspect of it, like most wrestlers. But back in that time, a lot of the gimmicks were very, very strange. So Vince has a wild imagination, definitely.
Any examples, like like 2 examples of like super strange?
I mean, you had
along the lines of Puke.
You had back in like the sort of mid 90s. You had a tag team, which 2 partners that wrestled together, called the Godwins, and they were 2 pig farmers from America, and you had Henry O. Godwin, which spells out hog, and you had Phineas I. Godwin, which spells out pig. Like, absolutely ridiculous. They'd come down in like they'd wrestle in like dungarees, look like absolute slobs, and you would even have times where they'd bring out what they called a slop bucket, which I'm guessing slop is like pig food. Like
that trough.
Yeah,
you put in a trough.
Yeah. And like if he won a match, he would empty the bucket onto his opponent, which is quite disgusting. Whether it was actual slop or it could have been just made up, it could be a prop, who knows. But I wouldn't have put it past him that it was actual real disgusting stuff. But that's one example. But then you could have gimmicks, like a lot of the gimmicks in the 90s were kind of tried to be made around like real jobs. So you had a trash man who was named Duke the Dumpster Drosy, and he'd come out with a trash can. So you had all kinds of weird gimmicks that would come up.
Yeah, and then the documentary goes on to show a few, like, I'd say, like, kind kind of burnt people, as in people who have been like kind of wrongs, they feel like they've been wronged by the WWF at the time. And what was it? There was Justin Incredible. There was
Just Incredible.
Yeah. But I mean, like on the thing, it said Justin Incredible, and I thought that was like you missed out there. But, there were, and he said that he got sent to some like backwater town. He wanted to get out of his contract, so
yeah. So they like sent him to a kind of, I guess you'd call it today, a kind of independent promotion, like where it wouldn't be in front of big crowds. I suppose in a way it was like WWF at the time, like saying, "Oh, we'll loan your company some of our talent." But in reality, it was probably more likely because this guy had spoke up and had an issue with being in his contract. So I guess in like the company's mind, it's a case of them going, "Okay, well, you don't like it, we'll show you what bad is." Like quite a dirty business.
Because the same thing happens. Like, was it Coco Beware?
Yep.
And at first, I thought the parrot in the background was like like green screen or something.
No, it's real.
I was like, oh well, why? That's such a weird thing to put in the background. Why has he got like the parrot like front? It's practically in his face.
Because that was his character in the WWF. He would come down with a parrot on his shoulder,
like a real life parrot.
A real life parrot.
Ah.
Yeah.
What was the parrot called?
I can't remember, even if it had a name. But you'd have you had a team called the British Bulldogs back in the day, and they'd bring a British Bulldog with them down. I know that dog's name was Winston. I remember that, but yeah, I can't remember the parrot's name.
Yeah, I just thought that was so bizarre. But then we move on to All Pro Wrestling. It's like it was like a school run by an accountant, which I liked how they mentioned that. But his name was Roland Alexander. Yeah, it seems busy. It follows like from his wrestling school. It does follow. Was it like Terry Jones? Who was this guy who worked at Visa, and he's like the fastest speaker like I've ever heard. I was like, what? Have they sped this up? Because I thought I speak fast, but this, like, I was like, what? I had to put it on slow down just to what? What are you saying? I'm not too sure.
It's that Visa voice, mate.
It's that Visa voice. Hi, welcome to Visa. Yeah. I'm Terry Jones. And Mike Modest, who was the golden boy enough that he got the room above the gym, which I thought
lucky you. I bet the smell was incredible.
Oh, yeah. I like that if you were like the kind of golden boy there, like you were the favorite wrestler, the guy, was it Roland the accountant, would be like, I like you, I'm gonna let you have the room above the gym, which obviously he's paying for, so I imagine everything's costing money regardless, like whatever, like because they focus on that in the documentary, how he goes around, he's like, oh, you know, are you ready to commit? You know, if you don't pay, you don't play.
Yeah,
it's a $500 deposit.
Mm-hmm. Classic promoter.
I don't know. I just thought it was funny when he goes to them, like he's, you know, because if they get in, they become huge. He gets 20% of their contracts. Like, I don't know if that's like ongoing or if that's like the contract signing overall, but he's like the manager, I guess.
Yeah, to a degree. I think it's a bit shady. But then you find that not as much these days, I wouldn't think, because I think there's more kind of high standard in a lot of promotions nowadays. But yeah, you do, as a professional wrestler, you do have to be careful of promoters and what they will try to take from you. But yeah, I wouldn't say that's the case everywhere that you go to train to wrestle, that someone would say, well, now that I've trained you for the rest of your career, you owe me this % of whatever you earn. because you'd be mad to take that deal.
Because you've gone to wrestling training school before, haven't you? And
yeah, I've been to two different ones, and yeah, two very, very different experiences. But yeah, like yeah.
Did you have to sign any contracts if you kind of happen to like make it or that kind of
No,
thing? Or was it just learning?
no.
No?
Like ours, the first school I went to was not long after I'd finished like school myself, like high school or secondary school. And yeah, the only thing I had to sign there was basically a waiver, to say that obviously although this is predetermined, there are a lot of aspects that are full contact, and like with anything like that, there is a possibility you could get hurt. So you've got to sign a waiver to say that you understand this, basically, which I can totally understand any training school doing, especially nowadays, because there has been there's a very big kind of suing culture. So the schools have to protect themselves as much as they will do what they can to protect you, and that's the point of learning to wrestle, is to be able to protect yourself and to protect the other person in there with you. They have to cover their own backs as well. So that would be the only thing I signed.
So how did your wrestling schools compare to this wrestling school? Was it pretty much like that?
I mean, we didn't have a room up above for the top student. And I guess some degrees seem similar. It's hard to tell because they don't, in the documentary, there's not a lot really shown of them actually training. It seems more about the promoter, really. So it's difficult to tell, really, but it's that kind of aspect. Like, it's, unless you're paying big money to go somewhere where they've got, a whole building dedicated to it, like with the WWE these days. Like, they have a place called the Performance Center in Florida, I believe. And I don't know if you can pay to get there or if it's just kind of by invite only, if you've been spotted out on the independent scene by anyone. But yeah, most training facilities are usually pretty dingy. There's usually a bit of a rotten smell because there's a lot of sweating that's going on in that place. But yeah, it's like I say, it's very difficult to tell with the doc because it just doesn't fully really go into anything. But yeah, I do find it difficult. Like, if that guy owns the school, he's not the trainer, surely.
No, I think he's as I said, like, he's an accountant. He definitely doesn't look like he does wrestling himself.
No, exactly. So I'm wondering, does he hire people in to train, or
must do? Maybe it's just like kind of side hustle. I mean, I guess it must have started off as like his, I guess, side hustle where he has like a business on the side of what he's doing, accountant. But I mean, because he must make a killing off like every time one of these wrestlers gets through. It must pay for itself overall. He did say there was no money in independent wrestling.
No, definitely. I mean, in those days, definitely not. You had to be making real money. You had to be working for one of the big leagues. And there was more than one. Like, WWF has always kind of been tippity top in terms of Western wrestling. But there have been other companies. In the past, you had WCW, another American company that kind of went head to head with WWF at the time. They lost out, unfortunately, which was kind of, in the long run, very detrimental to the business and detrimental to wrestlers. A lot of people lost their jobs when that happened. But yeah, the independent scene back then, it was rare that you would make any money. Whereas nowadays, again, like with the invention of the internet, people can promote themselves through the internet. They can open up their own shops, get T-shirts created for merch sales. So the independent scene nowadays is a whole lot better than it used to be.
The next major wrestler that comes into it is Terry Funk, who is 53 years old. He's been doing it at this point for 32 years, and he just, I don't know, like he's getting out of bed, he's like kind of wheezing, he just looks like a broken man.
Yeah.
Overall, like in the like, you know, when he's out of the ring anyway. And then like he goes to the doctors and they basically said like, you know, your knee's fucked, this is fucked, everything's ruined.
Yeah.
Like,
got
you know, basically
all the x-rays up on the screen, you're just like, wow.
It's you just think he must be in so much pain, like so much pain, like walking around, but he's like, he seems like he's surprised by it all. He's like, nah, I'm fine, you know. It's
yeah.
Kind of,
it's like that old school grit about him.
He does have like a bit of a limp, like when he's walking around outside of, you know, the wrestling world part, like when he's walking around, and he does look tired.
Yeah.
As you can imagine you can be. But what I thought is crazy is when it shows him get into the ring, he's like, you wouldn't think any of that. You'd think like because I guess the adrenaline running through his body.
Adrenaline is an amazing thing, an absolutely amazing thing. Like you could be, like even during a wrestling match, you could be genuinely hurt, but because that adrenaline is so high, you won't know how hurt you are until you walk through that curtain and go backstage and you sit, and then within 5-10 minutes you're like, okay, yeah, I'm a lot worse than I thought I was, and the adrenaline wears off and the pain sets in.
Yeah, it's like when you break a bone, you just don't realize it full stop until like you look at your arm and it's like, oh wait, I'm broken.
Yeah,
like it's the opposite way. But I thought it was crazy how he's like just jumping off like backflips and stuff, and it's
off of
I
ladders.
Can see, obviously, yeah, I can see how he's got into this predicament overall, but like he's loved by the crowd, it seems. I don't know. Can you tell us a bit about him, like around this time?
I mean, at the time, like, so it was for ECW, wasn't it? Extreme Championship Wrestling. And it was their first ever pay-per-view. So that's a big event that you will put on, and, you know, people will pay a certain amount of money to watch it. So it's a live event, but it's not a free live event. And that's very important for any wrestling promotion, because that can be a very big difference in making it and not making it. You know, are people willing to spend their hard-earned money on your product? And if they are, will they come back? You know, so for them, that was a huge showing. For them to get Terry Funk to actually wrestle on that show, that was, to them, that's a huge favor, because Terry Funk has such a history. Like you say, at the time, he'd been doing it for 30 years or something. And yeah, there's just such a rich history. Going back, more so for Americans, because they would watch Terry and his brother Dory Funk Jr. Wrestle on what we call like the independent scene now, would be an old wrestling circuit. Like you'd have what was called territories back in the day, before the WWF became such a big thing and kind of ate up all the territories and went on nationwide TV worldwide, so people didn't have to go out and watch these wrestling shows. They could just turn on the telly and watch the WWF. So yeah, it was a huge favor for Terry to do what he done for that promotion. yeah, so it was kind of a big deal, especially like for the owner of the promotion at the time, Paul Heyman.
Yeah, so the ECW stands for Extreme Championship Wrestling. Is it because like obviously there's like they use barbed wire, they use like more kind of like blood props, or like they kind of
Yeah, it is basically that. It's it was a more extreme, more kind of violent. It was R-rated, 18. Like this wrestling isn't for kids. That we will swear, we will curse, we will use weapons, and it will get bloody. There will be gore. So yeah, that's the reasoning of the name.
Is it usually real blood, or is it like little blood packs in the hair?
No, it'd be real blood.
Real
Like
blood?
especially there. There's a term in wrestling. It's called blading, and what you would do. Let's say someone hit you with some form of foreign object. What a wrestler would tend to do, if it didn't actually cut their face, but they wanted to get what you call color in a match, which is blood, they would, either the referee or they might even within their wrist tape have a little razor blade, or the referee will have it on him and he'll quietly pass it to that person, and they'll just slice into the top of their head, somewhere where you could make the tiniest little cut, but you bleed a lot from the head. And then all you've got to do then smush it around your face a bit, and it looks like an absolute bloodbath. But yeah, that's what a lot of wrestlers do. Like if you look a lot of old wrestlers from back in the day that have done a lot of blading over the years. I'll name one. You can look him up if you want. He's called Abdullah the Butcher. And he bladed a hell of a lot. He was in all kinds of crazy matches. And if you see the most recent pictures of him, his forehead is completely scarred up. It almost like a cheese grater had been taken to it. It's pretty disgusting. But again, that was part of his sacrifice for what he loved.
It's crazy to think about. Yeah, considering this Terry Funk is going from like wrestling where he's kind of already hurt himself and injured himself quite bad to something where it encourages, or it doesn't encourage that bit for the, I guess, the pantomime of it. It encourages blood. It encourages, that little thing. And it feels like it's a weird way to go from that to this. It's like kind of going from one extreme to the other. Why people not retire?
I mean, it really depends, but it's the type of business that once it's got you, it's very, very difficult to get out, because for most wrestlers, it is their passion. It's their love. It's what they've always loved. It's for a lot of them, it's the only job they've ever had. They've never, some of them have never had an office job or any kind of job like that. It's all they've ever known. So, and just the feeling of being in front of a crowd and, the adrenaline, the power you feel when you step between those ropes, and to make a crowd either cheer you or boo you, to have that level of control, that's hard to give up. It's very much like a drug. So yeah, for a lot of wrestlers, even when they're far beyond their prime or injured to a point where they really shouldn't be doing it anymore, will carry on for the love of it. And also to a degree to give back to the business, because it's, for a lot of these guys, a lot of these old guys, the reason they have the life they have in terms of money, and being able to have nice things, is because of what the business gave to them. So then they feel, out of respect, they then give back to the business. And for this new younger group coming up, you give back, you know?
Yeah, I suppose it just by him going there to be on this pay-per-view, he's promoting that whole business. Like it says in the documentary that if this match didn't take off, the like ECW just would have collapsed.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to kind of pass the baton to like another group of people, it
is. I mean, you'll find within the wrestling world, it is kind of a brotherhood, like, because for a lot of these guys, or guys and girls, sorry, like, if they're on the road, they're spending more time with each other than they do with their own families. So it becomes a family. So it is very much a brotherhood. And, you know, to lose a match to someone is what people will call doing the job. You do the job for someone. So if you think about any real contact sport, you don't want to lose. You want to win. That's your whole point of doing it. But whereas with wrestling, because it is predetermined, you know, you might want to lose a match to put over your opponent, who you might see as someone that could make it big or to do the favor back to them, kind of thing.
Yeah, we see that a little bit later on in the documentary, don't we? But we'll save that for a second. Before we go into the next wrestler, does Terry Funk have like a gimmick? Like, does he have like a shtick that he does? Or?
He has done. There was a time where he went to the WWF, and they gave him, rather than saying, you know, you come out as Terry Funk, as, you know, the person that is kind of known in the wrestling world, a lot of the time with the WWF / WWE, even still to this day, like, let's say today you were an independent wrestler, and you'd made an absolute name of yourself, like your character. If the WWE would see that, and they'd say, okay, we want that guy, but then they would say, well, but we're going to create a character for you because, you know, what you've already created, that's not our creation. We want it to be our creation that gets, you know, it's very strange. So with Terry Funk, I'm guessing maybe it was the same kind of thing, and they ended up naming him Chainsaw Charlie. And he would come to the ring with a chainsaw, funnily enough, and a pair of tights over his face.
What?
Yeah. So
how long was this, like around this time, or was it way before? Or?
No, I think this was. Trying to think. This was probably around. I want to say maybe around this time, around 99, 2000, maybe 98, possibly. But he was teaming at the time in the WWF with Mankind, Mick Foley, who we'll talk about later in the podcast. But yeah, so that's the only gimmick I can ever remember him having. He may have had others in his time, but a lot of that was before my time. I think he debuted in wrestling, Terry Funk, in like 1965 or 64. So, okay, you know, it's a long time ago.
It just seems kind of like, was it a real chainsaw? Because he's coming out with his like legs about to buckle any second. He's got like, you know, his face covered, you can barely see. And if he falls over with the chainsaw, he's going to do some damage.
I'm pretty sure that if I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure it was maybe a gimmicked chainsaw. So maybe the chain didn't actually move on it, but like the motor was in it, so it would make the noise. Or maybe they took the actual chain off. I don't know. But yeah, I can't imagine him letting him run around with a real chainsaw. It could be very, very dangerous.
Right, we'll move on to Mick Foley now, which is Mankind, the world's most polite wrestler, as I wrote down here because that's what he wanted to be referred to. He's 33 years old during this 33 during this documentary being filmed. Can you tell me about his character, like his gimmick overall? Just tell me about him.
So what, the Mankind character? Because it's
Mankind.
It's one of 3 characters that he would have in the WWF, which I'll go into, but I'll describe you Mankind as best I can. I think at the time that he was brought in to the WWF, they wanted somebody that could go up against the Undertaker at the time, and as I've said previously, the Undertaker's character was very, this kind of dark kind of character, very, Phantom of the Opera type of thing. But yeah, so they wanted a character that would kind of fit to go up against him. So Mankind was this kind of deranged. I don't even know how to explain it. He'd wear a mask, and it would almost looked like a leather belt or something, like strapped across his face, like very, very strange looking. And
his shirt is ripped open.
Yeah, just like very messy. But that the shirt didn't come till after. Like his first debut, he didn't wear the shirt or the tie, anything like that. That came later. He would just kind of wear brown slacks and this brown top, like with a kind of a symbol, I believe, on the back of it. I can't remember what the symbol was or what it referred to. But yeah, and before he actually wrestled in the WWF, they'd play kind of weekly or fortnightly little vignettes, like little sort of 2-minute video pieces of what in the wrestling business you call a promo, and it's basically a shortened version of promotion. It's promotion of yourself, promotion of your character, where you talk for a couple of minutes, and either in this sense it was kind of like this is who I am kind of thing, but I remember them being very, very strange. Like they'd be in like kind of almost felt like it was filmed in a sewer or something, like this dark kind of wet place, and he'd be just kind of sitting there in the corner rocking back and forth, and there'd be other ones where he'd have like a rat in his hand, and he'd be talking to it. Very, very, very strange. I couldn't tell you what the character was meant to be, other than some deranged guy.
He looks like an office worker who's just like absolutely snaps, like falling down kind of style. Like he's just ripped open his shirt, taking his belt off, putting on his head.
The ripped shirt and that was all kind of to do with a storyline that went on before this documentary was filmed, and Mankind became corporate. And at the time, like Vince McMahon was a huge on-screen character as I'm the big bad owner / dictator of this company. He played what you would call is a heel character, a bad guy. Your terms for bad guy and good guy in the wrestling business is a heel for a bad guy and a baby face, like for a good guy. And it was because I think the term babyface came from like way back in the day, where a good guy would be a kind of baby-faced, blue-eyed, blonde-haired kind of guy, like ones all the girls would cheer for and things like that. That I think that's where that term originated from. Heel, I don't know where it originated from, but I've heard it in a few things other than pro wrestling before to describe, a bad person. like someone.
Maybe someone who ends up underneath the heel. You know what I mean? As
Yeah,
in,
yeah, possibly.
like the person on the floor in the end.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, so it originated from a storyline. He went corporate. He like had his hair, or like when he went corporate, he wore a suit. His hair was all kind of straightened, brushed all neat, and he looked smart. And then I guess as the storyline developed, and he kind of went back to being a face, a baby face, a good guy, then that kind of stripped away all that kind of cleanly look, clean look. And I guess the shirt and tie kind of stayed, but just became a lot more messy.
What's the deal with the sock? Like was it Mr. Socko? They call it in the.
It's ridiculous. Mankind, when he first came to the WWF, his move to end a match, like his kind of, you'd call it your finishing move, like your go-to thing that you know will end a match, was something called the mandible claw. And Mankind, like I said, he wore all brown sort of clothing when he wrestled to begin with, and he'd have his hand strapped up with tape, and his middle finger and his ring finger would be like kind of tied together in like a little glove. And the idea of the move was to put those two fingers inside the mouth of your opponent, under their tongue, to press down on a pressure point, which would make them pass out. Obviously, he didn't really do that. One, that would be kind of disgusting. And two, you're not really trying to make someone pass out in there. But yeah, as his character developed into a good guy, I can't remember where the sock originated from. I think it might have been a skit that they done, a kind of part of a storyline, but like pro wrestling, especially WWF at the time, was very much based around storylines. So it wasn't always what happened inside the ropes. It would be like you'd have a story that would build up, so there'd be like filmmaking going on. And I believe Socko came from Vince McMahon, his on-screen bad guy character, Mr. McMahon, was in hospital, and there were people going to visit him, and Mankind went and visited him and brought along some clown, and it's comedy gold. Like, if I watched it today, I'd still laugh. And I believe it was during that he like pulled out this sock, put it on his hand as like a sock puppet, and then just started saying, "Oh, it's Mr. Socko," like trying to ease Vince McMahon's pain, but whereas Vince McMahon was just getting so angry at him. It's quite funny. But I think that's where it originated from. And then, like with most things in wrestling, if the fans see something and they love it, they'll usually be pretty vocal about it, which then means, okay, we can make money out of this. Let's incorporate it more into our product, which is what I imagine he did. And then he would start to use that like as a kind of signal for the mandible claw. He would reach into his pants, pull out this sock, put it on his hand, and then, do the mandible claw.
That sounds crazy.
Yeah.
But I love it. I love.
It's
I
wacky
it
as
weird
hell,
to
man.
see. I was like, what?
Yeah. and I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that at one time they sold as merchandise Mr. Sockos. So yeah, basically a white sock with a drawn face and goatee on it, like. And again, don't quote me because I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it was a piece of merchandise at one time, and it probably made quite a big sum of money.
Yeah, you just buy like a thing of gym socks, and you could double your money straight away just by doodling on them.
Yeah.
So there's a clip in here where it shows you him falling through the cage.
Yeah.
and uh, and it seemed really familiar to me because I was like, where do I know this from? And then it clicked that this is a Reddit meme. Like, this is a meme overall. About it's where I don't know if you might have seen it online where someone's talking about something completely different, like a different subject, something serious or that, and then at the end of the sentence it will fade into this, and it would say something like, "In 1998, the Undertaker threw mankind off Hell in a Cage and plummeted 16 feet for an announcer's table," and it could literally be talking about absolutely anything before that, and it would always like.
I've never seen that, but I
all,
love it already.
because I've seen it. It's like always. I've used Reddit quite a bit, and like the amount of times I've seen that where you read something and you're so enticed by like this post, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna find out something really cool, like a really interesting fact, and then it does this, and it's all bullshit.
Oh man!
Like it'd be like. It's like, yeah, don't let that distract you from the fact that in 1999, The Undertaker threw mankind off Hell in the Cell and plummeted 16 feet for an announcer's table. Like, it would always finish like that, like, for
That's
a while.
brilliant.
Like,
That's brilliant.
that was, I can't believe you haven't seen it, because it's like it's such a jokey, well, I mean, it's a wrestling.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, that's brilliant, though. I love the fact that that's out there.
Yeah, I'll link to this. Like, it's there's a thing called like know your meme, and like it's been used in like loads of different things where they joke about this.
Awesome.
And
I mean,
it's always the same line. Always the same line.
I love the fact that it's out there as well, just because. Yeah, damn right. Don't forget about it, because like I remember watching that pay-per-view, and I'd never in my life seen anything like it. I was just blown away. It was an event called King of the Ring, and I believe it was 1998. I want to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember watching that, and like I'd seen one Hell in a Cell match before that, and that also had the Undertaker in it. Also had a wrestler named Shawn Michaels. And that was a great match. It was kind of brutal for the WWF standards at the time. But not once did they wrestle on top of the cell. There was, I believe, maybe one kind of high spot in that originally, but it was nowhere to the degree of what happened in this match. The first fall alone was like, wow. Like, I think even the commentators say they've killed him. Like, he's got to be dead. Like,
is that he falls off like through it and into the ring?
That's probably that one, because I think most people probably did think he was dead after that. That was a nasty fall. The first fall, basically, in watching the event, the Undertaker and Mankind are wrestling on top of this cell, and it's made of like mesh kind of chicken wire maybe, or something. And you can see that already as they're wrestling on top of it. I mean, they're not doing anything really technical up there. They're kind of punching, kicking, but you can see under their weight that the mesh of the cage is already breaking and it's fraying at the sides. And already you're like, that's pretty dangerous. Like, they've got nothing. What if that falls through? But obviously you just think, oh, that won't happen. And it comes to a point where the Undertaker then throws Mankind off the side of the cell, to which he lands pretty spectacularly through an announcer's table. And this cell's quite high. I certainly would not like to fall from that height. Not in the manner that he did either. But yeah, I remember after that, like, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, this match is over. There's no way he's getting up from that. And a stretcher came down, EMTs and the medical team came down and started to stretcher Mankind out. Like, okay, you're done. Like, that's it. About halfway up the entranceway, Mankind decides to climb off of the stretcher and kind of hobbles back to the cell, basically saying, I'm not done, I'm not finished, and then proceeds to climb the cell again, not get in where it's, that much safer in the ring. No, he decides to climb back up, to which him and the Undertaker kind of brawl again, to which Undertaker performs a move that he does called a choke slam, which is effectively grabbing someone by the throat, lifting them up, and throwing them down onto their back. And yeah, he does this move, and as soon as Mankind hits the mesh, it just falls through, and his body just lands in the most kind of awkward, horrible position. There's not a lot of give to that ring as it is anyway. And falling from that height, yeah, and I think that's the point where the commentators are like, I believe it's Jim Ross at the time, the commentator, and he says they've killed him. That's it. He's dead. Somebody please stop the damn match. And yeah, at that point you see a lot of people slide into the ring to check on him. And I know the company physician is one of those guys. And I believe Terry Funk as well. I don't know if you see it on the documentary, but he also goes in and checks on Mankind, because he's actually very close friends with him. And yeah, it's absolutely brutal. I mean, what are your thoughts on, like, obviously not being, a fan of wrestling yourself, seeing that? Like, what was your feeling on that? Did you think that can't be real?
Well, I did think from it, I thought, oh, maybe it's just kind of, it wasn't real. I mean, because, like, I thought it's just, I thought it was insane because, like, he falls through, he's, like, crumpled up and stuff like that, and he, does all that. And I'm thinking, whoever's meant to actually win this match, how do they decide? Like, so if someone gets, like, really injured, how do they, like, say, oh, actually that person won? They must have, like, a storyline overall per thing. So if, let's say, Mankind does get really injured, gets carried out on the stretcher, technically the Undertaker's won. Like, what happens if it's not meant to be like that? What if it was meant to be Mankind winning and Undertaker?
Well, I mean, like, mistakes happen in the wrestling world. So, there are times where there might be somebody that is supposed to win that match, but, anything can go wrong at any time. And, if the worst happens, then either the match will just be stopped, flat out stopped, like that. That is and should be the referee's decision to make. Or they will call the finish. Like, okay, I'm hurt. Finish the match. Like, so pin me.
Does the match count? Or
yeah, it's still count. And then depending on how badly the person was injured, if they could be back in a matter of weeks, then they can carry on the storyline. Or if it's a more serious injury, then then okay, well, we have to write that storyline off and go in a different direction.
Oh, so they would move with the actual events though, if someone did get like if they broke their arm like accidentally.
Yeah. I mean, you
work it into the storyline.
You find with a lot of wrestlers, which is has a lot of time been to their detriment, is they're very, very proud. So they may get hurt in a match, but that's their livelihood. So if you tell your boss that you're hurt and you're unable to do your job and you've got to go and sit at home on the couch for 6 months, you're not making the money you would be if you're out on the road. So for a lot of wrestlers, they would hide injuries, which obviously later on in life will come back to bite them in the arse. But that's kind of the nature of the beast. Like I've seen matches, even recently, but also from the past, where a wrestler will be just doing the simplest of moves, and then all of a sudden their fingers dislocated, and they'll pop it back into place themselves, or their shoulder. So yeah, they're tough bunch of people.
So let's move on to Jake the Snake Roberts. I've heard of his name before, but I'd never seen anything at all about him before. Is he a major wrestler to you? Or
oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was around massively. He was a big part of my early sort of wrestling watching years. He was one of these he was a part of this era of these cartoon characters come to life. The likes of Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man. Just these really, really outlandish characters. And yeah, Jake the Snake was around back then. So kind of late 80s, early 90s. And yeah, his gimmick was that he would bring a bag down to the ring, which contained a python or a cobra, a snake. And usually in the WWF, the way it would work would be that he would win a match, and then he would go to the corner where the snake was in this bag, and then open the bag onto his fallen opponent after winning the match. Here you go, this snake's on you now, you must be scared, kind of thing, and again, as a kid, it was like, whoa, because you were like, that's huge, that could, does it bite, does it, has it got venom, oh my god, and he was originally portrayed as a heel, as a bad guy, and he could give promos, interviews backstage, that a lot of wrestlers at the time would shout and would be really really animated in their performance, whereas Jake, he was very, very quiet. He would almost whisper to the camera, but the things he would say, they drew you in, and you would believe every single word he said. He just had a magic about it. He was still to this day known as one of the best promo guys in the business. But yeah, he was a big deal. Part of a massive time for the WWF originally. And then, yeah, unfortunately, he came into some pretty bad problems in his life and had quite a few demons to face.
So did he formally retire from wrestling before the show that's in the documentary? Had he retired, or had he just gone MIA, or?
Well, he left the WWF in I can't remember the exact year, but it would have been early 90s, I think. And I don't know for sure what he did then, whether he may have gone to WCW at the time, and wrestled for that company instead. But I can't be sure. If not, he may have worked more kind of independently, because whilst working for the WWF, you're on worldwide television, so you create quite a name for yourself. So therefore, if you leave there, and if you're able to still use the name that you were using in the WWF, people will pay a lot to see you, because that's the guy off TV. We've seen him on TV, so and even if you couldn't keep the name or the gimmick, if the company, the WWF, had created the gimmick or owned the gimmick and didn't want you to use that outside of their company because that was their stock, basically, then a lot of the time you would still make a lot of money just because you would have your face would be recognized like the world over because of the promotion you'd had as your character through the WWF. So he may have gone and wrestled independently, but I remember he came back to the WWF in I want to say maybe 1996, after a good few years hiatus from the company, and he returned, and his kind of return vignettes were that he'd found God, and this was the first time that I ever heard that he'd had any kind of struggles in his life, and I believe at that time it was alcohol, or at least that's what I believed as a child at the time, that he'd had alcohol problems. And yeah, he came back and he looked very different. Like, he'd put on quite a lot of weight. He just looked like he'd aged quite a lot. He didn't look like the same guy. The attire, the clothing he'd wear to the ring was different, like to more kind of, I guess, suit the size he was, because maybe he had hang-ups about, being overweight or whatever. But yeah, it was like, I remember seeing it as a kid, and I was so excited that he was coming back because he was such a big part of my early childhood. And then when he came back, I was like, wow, like, it was just scary how different he was. And you could tell he'd aged and that he'd been through a lot. But obviously at the time, I had no idea really the kind of struggles he'd had. And not long after his return, and as I say, I think it was 96, he wasn't with the company very long. I think maybe a year. It wasn't long at all. But I believe that he unfortunately fell again, and had more struggles with alcohol and possibly drugs.
Yeah, because he comes across, like, in the early stuff as like the smoothest talker ever. He's like super charismatic. And one of the guys in the documentary, I can't remember his name. He's like never had like like a wrestler physique. It's kind of like more like just a really average body.
He wasn't muscle bound ever. Like, even when he was first there, like that's what I mean. When he came back, it was just like, when people get old and like weight kind of hangs a bit. Yeah, like that's what it was like. Whereas when he was first there, like he was in shape, but he wasn't one of these muscle bound, like, action figure type wrestlers,
Yeah, and when he come back, was he still just as like much a smooth talker, or do you still feel like he had that?
He did. It was still there, but his promos revolved a lot around the Bible and verses of the Bible. Like, it was the whole thing with Jake. Like, a lot of the times, because he had so many struggles with drugs and alcohol, and because he could make you believe anything, it was hard to know what to believe with him. So there was a lot of people that thought that the reason he was leaning so much on Bible verses and stuff within his promos was almost to throw people off the scent. I don't know that for sure, but there has always been that with Jake, especially in the past, because of the struggles he had.
One of the promoters says that like he wouldn't turn up to the show because he put crack as a rider. Yeah. And they said, look, I'm not going to perform unless you get me some crack. Yeah. And I don't know, I guess that was like around the time he kind of like disappeared a bit. Maybe a lot of the promoters distanced themselves from him.
They did, like, especially big time promotions. Like, a lot of your kind of seedy at the time, small time promotions, like it wouldn't be a bother to them, because they were like, you know, if his name's on the poster, whether he comes to the show half cut or, you know, ready to go, it doesn't matter to us, because that name on the poster means butts in seats, means ticket sales up.
Is it like the guy says an arse over every 18 inches or something like that? It was,
and that because at the end of the day, it is a business. And for these small time promotions, getting a big name like Jake the Snake, that will sell tickets, especially at that time. So yeah, I mean, a lot of these kind of small time promotions, they wouldn't look out for Jake. They, you know, if you see someone struggling and, you know, you think the right thing to do is try to offer help, not let's exploit this. Which to a degree, I kind of like, and it's kind of a big thing with a documentary. Like Jake hates this documentary, like vehemently hates it. He feels that he was exploited by the filmmaker, and there is a part of me that does feel he was.
It doesn't put him in a good light, and there's certain things that they could have chose to leave out, but they kind of kept in anyway. And like a lot of the times where I feel like he's revealing stuff, like really personal stuff, like I don't know if he's actually aware of it.
There's
like,
times where there's a part, I think it must be after a match he's had, and he's there just talking, like, I'm guessing to the director, but it looks like the camera's like positioned in a way where it's like, oh, the camera's not on, by the way. You know, I'm just holding the camera in my hand loosely here. Like, it almost looks like it's kind of a, you know, like this, this guy doesn't know we're filming. We're going to get all the dirt. And I just feel as well with, like, there's a part where he's speaking and he's quite obviously on drugs. And I just think, does that need to be shown? Like, you know, some people might say, oh yeah, but maybe they asked him if it was all right. Well, yeah, of course he's going to say it's all right. He's not in any fit state to make that kind of decision. So I do feel there is that dark side of it, definitely. And I can totally understand Jake's point of view of disliking this documentary and how he was treated.
The part in the hotel room where he's getting filmed upwards, you know, it looks like it is like a kind of a slide shot, which that leads to one of the interesting parts for me. I feel like he says that he loves doing small shows as he feels more of a connection with his fans. Like he can point out in the audience and have like, there's a bit where he has that girl, like a really young girl, come up on the stage and he puts the snake over the top of her. And he's like, you know, she might, you know, go off and have like, you know, 7 kids after that, you know, like she might, you know, it's like saying about the future, but she'll never forget this moment of her idol inviting her up onto the stage, you know, making like a, you know, this big moment. And he loves that. He loves the kind of, you know, feeling that. But what's weird is straight after that, it shows like the tail end of like a conversation where it's basically some kids like, oh, hi, Jake, can I have your autograph? And he's like, no, just need to just leave, and he walks off. But like you can tell that he must have stayed there for a bit. It looks like he was talking to that group of people, and then he was like leaving. It wasn't like he was.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Like... and you've got to remember, like for someone like him, when you've performed on a global scale, like these wrestlers at the time, like of working in the like late 80s, early 90s for the WWF, like they were worldwide stars. Like it was everywhere. So it'd be the same as, you know, someone from Hollywood, like, you know, going from, you know, performing on this set that is, you know, closed off to the public to performing, you know, at some little stage play where the public are right there. Like as soon as you leave, they know where your car is. Like, so, you know, and for a lot of people, like a lot of wrestlers they always make time for their fans. They'll sign things after shows. They'll they'll chat, they'll shake the hands, they'll, have a little discussion. But at the same time, they've got lives outside of it. They need to get on with what they're doing. And they've just wrestled a match. They're probably tired. They probably want to go home. And sadly for Jake at this time, he may have wanted a fix. So he probably wanted to get out of there ASAP, because addiction is addiction. And sadly, when it comes to especially hard drugs, that addiction can overpower anything and everything. So, I imagine that may have had something to do with him wanting to get out of there quick as well. But yeah, I would say from the most part, like pretty much all wrestlers will do their best to make time for their fans. And I'm sure he probably did there as well.
I would say one of the most shocking things that's said during the Jake the Snake part is a bit that I had to listen to it 3 times to like understand what he was saying, because I found it really difficult to understand what he was saying, and I don't think he was all there at the time. So when you say that he was completely against his documentary, I do feel like they might have filmed him when he was under the influence.
Oh yeah, they definitely did. 100%.
There was the part where he said his mother was 13 years old when he was born, and that his dad, who was going out with his mother's mother at the time, basically raped this little 13-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't hear that whatsoever the first time, because I think it was like it was slurry, it was like, intelligible. And it just seems he's had such a hard upbringing, and like no wonder he kind of like went off the rails a little bit. It's like all this kind of weight around him, because it shows a bit with his, like, is it his dad? I don't know if it's the dad that did the deed, or is it like his
that kind of awkward scene of them like chopping wood and stuff.
Yeah, was his name Grizzly Smith? Was that his dad?
Yeah.
Was that the dad who did that?
I think. I don't know. I don't want to say for sure.
No, I wasn't too sure about that, because it didn't make it too clear. Because, but
even with that, like, I don't know how true that is, because the only time I'd ever heard about that was through this documentary, and again, Jake being quite obviously under the influence a lot of the times, it's a struggle to know, what's real, what's make believe. But at the same time, I can't imagine just making up a story like that. Like, that's pretty dark. And like you say, is kind of helps you understand why his life had the trajectory that it did, and falling into drugs and alcohol, and because he obviously never dealt with those issues. He buried them deep, and I suppose the only way to kind of numb that pain and numb those thoughts would be to kind of, I suppose, self-medicate, but I guess in the worst way possible.
But I do wonder if the reason for those, for like, say, the drugs, the alcohol abuse, and is because, like, he's like an older wrestler. He's probably in pain just as much as, say, Terry Funk is. And I wonder if they, do a lot of older wrestlers turn to like substance abuse to ease the pain, or even get addicted to pain medication.
I mean,
a lot of the time,
painkillers and painkiller addiction in the pro wrestling world is or has been rife over the years. It's got a lot better nowadays. There's more kind of checks and balances within companies now, like drug testing and all sorts. But there are many, many, many wrestlers that have unfortunately passed away over the years at very young ages due to their addiction to these painkillers, and then it's a case of it becomes a cocktail. Like you've got pain medication, you've got alcohol, you've got for a lot of them, especially in the kind of 80s, a lot of cocaine use, and because if the only thing I can describe it by is when I originally done some wrestling training, and I got to do a couple of shows just at a local level. And it was nothing spectacular. I was pretty damn awful. But the adrenaline rush just from having a match, like I couldn't sleep that night, not at my regular time, like because you were pumped. Like, and so if I was like that on a small scale, you can only imagine what it must be like for these guys that are in front of thousands of people in a crowd. Like it must be just insane. Like, so they would rely on drugs and alcohol not only for their pain, but for also to wake up and to go to bed. It's just a dangerous mixture.
One of the main parts of the Jake the Snake part is also him reconnecting with his daughter, who he hasn't seen in a while. At the beginning of the segment, he does mention that hasn't seen her in a couple of months, but then it becomes apparent that it's been like 4 years since he last seen her, and she's definitely holding on to some baggage around the whole thing. When she unveils the book that she has, I don't know if that's her current book, what she was that she had at the time, or was it when she was a kid? I think it was more when she was a kid, because I don't know. It's just difficult where she's like putting Sylvia like bath, and
like being a professional wrestler, like especially on a big scale, is very, very difficult on family life, because these guys and girls are like, especially if you're wrestling for a company like the WWF or the WWE, any big time promotion like that, you are on the road more than likely about 300 days a year. So that is the majority of a year that you're on the road. There's not a lot of off time. There's no off season for pro wrestling. Whereas with like football and a lot of other sports, you have a season, you have an off season, you have a season, you have an off season. So there's time to not only rest and recuperate in between, but also to spend time with your loved ones. But for wrestlers, it's not the case. You are on the road a lot of the time, so you will, as a wrestler, miss a lot of the time that your child's first words, sometimes the birth of your child, these events like school plays that your child's doing, or sporting events that your child's doing, anniversaries like with your spouse. It's very, very hard on the family, and that's I go again, part of the sacrifice. Like, a lot of wrestlers say their first love is pro wrestling. Whether they have a wife or kids, or vice versa, if it's a female wrestler and they have a husband and kids, wrestling is their first love. Like, it's, and you've got to think that obviously money plays into it, because being on the road that amount of time, you'll get paid a decent amount of money. So you could look at it as that's a part of the sacrifice I make to be able to, to make my family have nice things. But as a child growing up, to not have that father figure or mother figure around must be very, very difficult, especially if they're at the time wrestling for a company like the WWF and they're other kids' heroes. Like, that must be very, very difficult.
There's a weird juxtaposition between Mick Foley and Jake the Snake Roberts overall, because obviously it seems like Mick Foley's like dad of the year with them. Like his kids absolutely love him. He's like, you know, he's seems to spend a lot of time with his family overall. I mean, for the court, like I'd say his part of the documentary is just as much about his family
Yeah.
as it is about him, and they're like very core to him, like overall, and that's what's hard to see going into see Jake's part, because like it shows you how it can go wrong, and how, like, you know, the two sides of wrestling overall. I don't know if I don't know about how it has gone recently, but I don't know if Mankind is, you know, still sees his kids or that. It's hard to know, because it's been like what 21 years
Yeah.
since this
No,
documentary
yeah,
came out. But
they're a very, very, very close family. Like I think one of Mick's sons is, I don't know if he still is, but I know at least maybe a year or so ago, he'd actually become a writer for the WWE. Helping to write storylines and create characters. And his daughter, who you see in the documentary, Noelle, like she's grown up. I think she has a lot to do with the wrestling business, but not as like she's a big fan, very big fan. I think she attempted to step into the ring and, you know, have a go at it, but I think it just didn't work out for her. It wasn't right for her. But I think she's involved in modeling and stuff like that as well. So, but yeah, they adore their father, absolutely adore him.
yeah, it's hard to see that overall, isn't it? Just I mean, not hard to see that they adore the father, but I mean, hard to see the difference of the
Yeah,
paths it can
I
go
mean, I
overall.
think sadly a lot of it is due to Jake's demons at the time. I think, you know, if all this stuff from his past is true about his background, you know, I imagine there'd probably be a sense of him thinking that he doesn't want to pass that on. Like, he doesn't want to, you know, maybe he saw himself as bad, and like, oh, if I stay more out of my family's or children's lives, then I won't pass on what was passed on to me. Maybe he saw it like that. But I imagine that played a big part. But also the drugs and the alcohol, his addictions, probably played a massive part. Like, anyone with a huge addiction to any kind of hard drug usually foregoes seeing family, usually foregoes seeing friends, because that drug becomes everything to them. They need it, and it's easier for them to turn down going to, say, this family dinner than it is to say no to that bag of crack that night or whatever it may be. You know, addiction takes hold, and unfortunately the family suffers there as well. Whereas, you know, Mankind, you know, he didn't go down that route. You know, he didn't fall into the drugs or the alcohol. So I guess really that just made him more available for his family.
At the end of the documentary, it shows you Mankind and The Rock like gonna fight it out for a was it what's the reason why?
So they're having a I Quit match at a pay-per-view event called the Royal Rumble, and yeah, I think it was mainly the whole idea of the match was literally because, you know, Mankind had built up this reputation of, you know, being able to endure crazy amounts of pain, and The Rock as the bad guy saying, okay, then, you know, not only will I beat you, I will make you utter the words "I quit." Something you said you will never do, something you have never done. So it was about that. I believe I think it was for the like heavyweight championship title at the time. Which is, to any fan of any like sort of contact sport, that championship belts are a thing. So like in boxing, in UFC, and it's the same with pro wrestling. But obviously, a championship belt is kind of a prop. It's usually used to put on someone that you think could be like the face of that company, the kind of most loved character, or the most hated for the most loved to take it off of. But it's to put a championship belt on someone in the wrestling world it's the company basically saying that they put stock in you. So it's a great thing because it means you mean something to the company, and it hopefully means that it will sell tickets, which will mean that your pay is better as well. So that's kind of the point of a championship belt. But obviously, in the world of wrestling, it's something that's won and it's something that's lost. But the real idea of it is it's a tool to put this thing means you're towing that company. You're the guy.
And they wanted to do that with The Rock, didn't they? They wanted to make him the new face.
Yeah,
of
I think
like
from like The Rock's, I believe a third generation wrestler, which basically means his grandfather was a professional wrestler, and so was his father. So you could say it was kind of in his blood. I think The Rock came from college football, done really well in college football, American football, that is. I don't know if he had an injury or whether it just didn't work out for him, but he decided to follow in his father's and grandfather's footsteps. And I'm guessing that because his father and grandfather were quite big names in the wrestling world, that kind of maybe opened doors to the WWF for him. He started out, and his character wasn't The Rock at first. It was Rocky Maivia, which was a split of his and his dad's and his grandfather's name. His father was Rocky Johnson, and his grandfather was High Chief Peter Maivia, from the islands, because they're Samoan family. It was Rocky Maivia. He used both his father's and his grandfather's name, which was kind of cool. But that character never really got anywhere with the fans. The fans started to dislike him. He was kind of like this. He was like primed and prepped to be a babyface character. And I think the fans kind of saw through that. So they would start to boo him. Even though he was supposed to be this good guy, they were like, this isn't what we want. So therefore we're going to make our voices heard and boo him, which eventually, good business decision is, okay, well, if they're booing him, then we turn him into a bad guy, so then, he's getting the correct reaction from the crowd, but also he can then answer the crowd back. He can say what he wants to them, which in turn should make them boo him more, which is all part of the magic.
I don't know. I thought there's a lot more interesting, because The Rock just, I don't know. It never seemed to make any sense to me, why he was called The Rock. Why he kept on going about do you smell?
Yeah,
what the
so
Rock is
he'd
cooking?
refer to himself as in the third person. So it'd be like The Rock says this, that, and the other. I don't know where that came from. Obviously, The Rock just came from his name of Rocky Maivia. And I guess it was just a case of, I need to change up my name as I'm changing up my gimmick slightly. And I guess, you know, it was a way of him maybe keeping that kind of bit of heritage.
Yeah, when as like a non-wrestling fan, when I was, well, not like, you know, as a person who wasn't really into wrestling when I was younger, just hearing him talk in this third person, how he spoke, just irritated me. Like, it was just, and then him being just, he was like the face of wrestling for me as like a non-fan. Like, it was him and I guess Stone Cold Steve Austin and yeah, just anybody who kind of like surfaces into the kind of the pop culture beyond.
Yeah, it's like
wrestling.
they've broken through. Like, then
John Cena, and
Hulk Hogan back in the day. Yeah,
Hulk Hogan,
done so many films, and you know, he transcended the business.
Yeah, and I can see that the reason why they did this match at the end of the documentary was to set up, like, kind of passing the baton to, you know, from Mankind to The Rock, to kind of put like some more weight in, you know, him overall. And I just thought it was, you know, like, obviously the Mankind or Mick Foley at the end is like covered in blood.
Yeah, it was a brutal match. There's parts of the documentary, like, obviously at the time, like, being a fan, like, I watched this pay-per-view. I probably didn't watch it live because time difference in the UK. And I didn't have Sky, so a lot of the time my uncle would tape the events for me on VHS, and I'd have to wait 3 days for it to come in the post. So I would, you know, luckily I wasn't on any social media because it didn't exist. But yeah, the playground at school, like, the following few days was very, you know, it would be risky because I'd be like, I do not want to hear what has happened. But obviously, a lot of the time I would, unfortunately.
And obviously, the documentary filmmaker focuses on his kids and his family watching this match unfold at the same time. And I don't know, I just felt like it was kind of, because Mick refers to, oh, there's where they took that photo. So they must have took a photo of his family reacting to it, and it must become like a big thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it. I don't know whether it was a case of you know, being a big thing, like mainstream big thing or anything like that. But I imagine just Mick, like, Mankind, seeing that photo. You know, because I think he even says in the documentary, like, that made him feel like a bad father, like, because his children, you know, and they're you know, they're not like teenagers or anything at the time. They're young kids, and yeah, like, I think he just felt genuinely bad about how violent the match became. And his children witnessing that, because it was quite harrowing for them. Like, they were crying. His wife, it looked like it was difficult on her as well. Like, they're in like the front row watching this match happen, and like I say, remembering it from the, like, seeing the actual match, like, there's a lot in the documentary that they don't show, and there's countless times in this match where The Rock will wield a steel chair, like a metal folding chair, and proceed to just smash Mankind in the head with it. And there's a thing in the business called protected chair shots, which is where you will stick your hands up to take the most of the blow away. So it's your hands taking the hit, not your skull. Mick being Mick, leaves his hands down, or I believe even in this match, I think The Rock handcuffs Mick's hands behind his back, so he, even if he wanted to put his hands up, he couldn't. And these chairs are hard. Like, I remember growing up and always thinking, like, they can't be real chairs. They must be made out of tinfoil or something. Until I actually felt and held a real metal folding chair for real in my own life, and how heavy it is. And actually, being a wrestling fan, asking someone to just bump me on the head with it. At the lightest possible level, it hurt. And yeah, I mean, if I can find a clip of some of these shots that he took, I'll send them your way, because they are mean hits. And to this day, in big wrestling promotions like the WWE, they won't allow chair shots to the head anymore, because there's been a lot over the past few years of CTE, and concussions and the damage to the brain that, a various amount of concussions can do, and the danger that holds to that human being. So they don't allow it anymore. If you do it in a promotion like the WWE, more than likely the company will fine you a lot of money for doing so, because at the end of the day, it's kind of their arse on the line as well, because I think the WWE have had to deal with a lot of lawsuits over the years of kind of wrestlers that maybe didn't quite ever really make the big time, or to what they wish they would have. And now they're having all these problems, and they're blaming it on the company they wrestled for. So yeah, these days it's not allowed in big promotions, but you do see it the world over still. In wrestling, it does still happen.
At the end of the documentary, it flashes up what happened to the people, the sub-characters within the documentary. It tells you that Tony Jones and Mike Modest didn't make it, so Roland didn't get his 20%. I do feel bad for Tony Jones and Mike Modest. It said that Tony was still working at Visa. Mike was, I don't know, I can't remember what he was doing in the end. It was something like he was a furniture remover. I think that's what it was. Roland's gym was still open, but then he lost the license, I think, for like live shows. I think from what I could tell, what they were talking about. Terry Funk retired in the documentary. Then he come out of retirement 3 months later.
And I think that happened on more than one occasion after that as well. That he tried to retire and ended up coming back again. Like that's what I mean. That's what I mean by like the business can get a hold of people, man. Like just when you thought you was out, it pulled you back in.
Jake the Snake Roberts went to prison for not paying child support. I don't know if that was to his daughter within the documentary, or if he has like another kid.
I think he has other children as well.
And then the biggest shock for me was that Puke, Darren Dodd.
Yeah, so just before, so the Puke thing never worked out for him. So he was known as Droz, D-R-O-Z. Through his wrestling career. Yeah, the Puke thing never took off. I don't ever remember him actually being the character Puke, or disgustingly throwing up on somebody. It may have happened. I might actually look into that, but I never remember it. I always remember him as Droz. But yeah, carry on. Sorry.
I can't imagine it. Like I can't imagine that happening like in the ring. But I'm interested to see if it has happened, because you think there must be some kind of like hygiene code, sort of like workplace code, where you can't have people just having their stomach bile and stuff coming out.
Well, that's why in a lot of wrestling as well, like they stopped people blading. Cutting themselves to bleed in the ring because of hepatitis and stuff like that. You catch all kinds of things. So there was a long time where it was stopped. But again, I think things have got to a point now where companies are a lot more careful with testing people and, making sure people are as, clean as they can be.
Finally, at the end, it tells you that 3 weeks after the documentary was completed, he was paralyzed and wants to walk again one day.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like, it just kind of, from the beginning of the documentary, where you see him kind of like young, kind of buck, and he's like excited to start, and the whole puke thing didn't take off, and then him overall, I guess, probably didn't take off.
He
Overall,
done well for his time there. He done quite well. Like, he didn't reach the heights of a lot of wrestlers, but for what he did whilst he was there, whilst he was able, he didn't do badly. But yeah, I mean, he never got to the heights of like The Rock or say a Stone Cold Steve Austin. He never reached them heights.
Yeah, because as far as they know, the director was filming this for 3 to 5 years, I think. I think he was on the road for that long. So his career must have only lasted, like, say, about 3 years or so.
He wasn't there long at all, unfortunately.
No.
Yeah, but like I said earlier, you know, accidents do happen, and you know, as fake as people want to call it, you know, there's nothing fake about being paralyzed. You know, I'm sure Darren Drozdov isn't sitting there going, "Oh well, yeah, you know, this is fake." You know, just look at my wheelchair. I'm unable to move my legs. You know, so it's very sad, but unfortunately, it is part and parcel of the business. Mistakes do happen. Mistakes will happen. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes a mistake could be, like I said earlier, a dislocated finger or something, which in the grand scheme of things isn't too bad. I still wouldn't like it. But, you know, that compared to a broken neck, yeah, it can be very, very dangerous. But that's why, as well, wrestling training is so important. And, you know, for anyone, you know, if there's any listeners like that ever think about, you know, that they want to do something like that, find a reputable trainer. Don't just go anywhere, because it's not only your life in your hands when you're in that ring, it's the other person's as well. And like, wrestling is like, a lot of it is trust. Like, you have to trust the person you're in there with, because if you don't trust them, then, you know, that's when things will go wrong. So yeah, just for anyone, if they're ever thinking about doing anything like that, please find a reputable trainer. It's not difficult to do with the internet these days. Easy to find. But I'd say that's very, very important.
Everybody listen to Matt. Okay, all right. We're going to have a short break, and we'll be back in a second talking about what's happened in the last 21 years. And we're back. Now we're going to look into what's happened since the documentary finished. 21 years. Lots can change in 21 years. Matt, you're my go-to guy on this. What has happened? Like, is there anything that stands out overall?
I'd say the main thing, and probably the biggest kind of change, and kind of like kind of a bit of a happy ending, is Jake Roberts. He's come leaps and bounds. Now, since the documentary originally, and there's footage out there, he basically hit rock bottom. Excuse the pun for any wrestling fans. But yeah, he literally hit rock bottom. There's video out there of him wrestling at some kind of like low level kind of indie show. But he's like completely inebriated, to the point where it's dangerous for the other guy with him. It's dangerous for him. And it's not something you would want on video, and certainly something you wouldn't want people to see normally. But yeah, after seeing this, there's a guy involved in the wrestling business named Diamond Dallas Page. He was a pro wrestler. He started off as a manager role in the wrestling business, and then in his mid-30s became a big star in wrestling. I believe he was maybe about 35 when he won the World Championship in WCW. And he's had quite a great career in wrestling. Since leaving wrestling, this guy, Diamond Dallas Page, has tried to fill his life with other things, and he's created a thing named DDP Yoga or DDPY. It's quite popular, and a lot of wrestlers have used it, and it helps with aches and pains. It's made wrestlers that are a bit older, that struggle with walking and things. It's eased that for them. So if they commit to this, usually they're walking a lot better, their joints are a lot better. And basically, he's a long-time friend of Jake. And I think when he saw this video surface online of Jake in a really, really bad way, he decided, right, as a friend, enough is enough. I need to try and help my friend. In which he did. He basically took Jake in, and he had this basically DDP, Don Dallas Page. He would call his house the accountability crib, and he would bring in like wrestlers like Jake with that had many problems with drugs, alcohol, and whatnot, and try and recuperate them. Get them back on their feet, get them back to a position that they possibly never ever thought they'd be able to get back to. And there's actually like a documentary out there. It's called The Resurrection of Jake the Snake Roberts, and it follows his journey through his healing. And yeah, I think I can't think how long he's been clean for now, but quite a long time. He's had a few bumps in the road, and he speaks about that on the documentary. Whilst he was trying to get clean and trying to get healthy again, he did have a few bumps in the road, but again, Dallas stuck by him and pushed through with him. Wasn't gonna let down his friend. And yeah, it's definitely a documentary to watch. And yeah, that would kind of explain things better than I could. But yeah, currently to this day, just last week, in fact, Jake the Snake Roberts appeared on a company named AEW, All Elite Wrestling. They have worldwide TV. They're basically the second biggest pro wrestling company in the United States. And yeah, he showed up there last week, came down to the ring, cut a promo on another wrestler. Not to be an in-ring wrestler, like there's no way his body would be able to do that anymore. But it looks like he's coming in as kind of a mentor to some of the younger guys. And yeah, it's just a complete turnaround. Like, even in the documentary, Beyond the Mat, when you see him kind of at his worst there, like, there's been times where he's looked worse than that still, since then. But yeah, you look at him now, he's now inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and kind of a part of that induction from the company was, if you're clean, and you prove that you can stay clean for a long amount of time, we'll induct you into our Hall of Fame, which they did. And yeah, it's just it's a very nice ending to the story, and he's reconciled with his family. He sees his grandchildren now. He's a big part of their lives. yeah, so I'd say that's the kind of best story to come out of it, is the fact that Jake's been able to turn his life around, but massively, massively, and he'll say this himself, through the help of Diamond Dallas Page. Just one of the nicest and best guys in the business. Countless wrestlers he's helped, and quite big names as well that have kind of fallen off the wayside, and he's tried to, he's got them back on their feet. Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. I don't know, I half expected you to tell me he had died or something like that.
He's the one guy who like most people would expect would be dead. Like, because Jake, when he was in the midst of his problems, like it was bad. It was really bad. But yeah, it just shows you what a bit of like positivity can do for someone, and just having someone believe in you and tell you, look at who you were, and now look at who you are now, and let's try and get some of the older you back. Let's try and let's finish this book, the last chapter of this book. Let's make it a good one. Not just a not just a number, not just another early wrestling death. And yeah, I just think that's amazing. To see where Jake was and how bad things had become for him. Yeah, to see him now is just, it's a joy. It puts a smile on my face, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely need to check out that documentary. We'll put the link to the IMDb of that documentary, or the link in general, in the show notes. What has happened to Terry Funk?
Terry Funk, in the past, he's still going. I don't think he's still wrestling. But yeah, the past few years, I've not seen much at all. Not really read much. The last thing I saw from him, apart from like random interviews and stuff, but yeah, last thing I saw was I think it was in 2010, maybe 2009. And I didn't see it at the time, but I've seen it in recent years since, just delving deep in YouTube, in pro wrestling culture. But yeah, I found a thing on YouTube, dated 2010, and it's named the Terry Funk Incident. And so, yeah, if this is in 2010, this is 10 years after this documentary was made. And, he was in a pretty bad way back then. So you can imagine the toll that 10 years more would do. And yeah, it's, I think I've sent you the link. It's worth a watch. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long. But yeah, he's crazy. He's a crazy dude.
What happens in the clip?
So in the clip, it looks like he's receiving an award from a wrestling promotion, like a small wrestling promotion, but just almost like a lifetime achievement kind of award type of thing. So he's up there, he's up at a podium accepting this award, and he gets given like a framed picture that's been drawn of him by someone or other. And then a few minutes later, after he's just, accepting it, from behind him, from what you can guess is a wrestler, a younger wrestler from this promotion, steps up to him and starts bad-mouthing him, basically, and saying, like, who the hell are you? You're a has-been, all this and all that. And just directly, full pelt, slaps Terry Funk in the face,
What?
To the point where I believe Terry's eardrum may have been popped. It's like, if you watch the clip, it's a nasty slap. Like,
he's 63 years old at this point.
Exactly. Yeah, and more than one slap too. Slaps him once, full pelt. The sound alone is enough to make you wince. And carries on slapping him, to which Terry then returns the favour. And it all turns into some kind of little brawl in what looks like almost like a press conference atmosphere. Yeah, it's a bit messy. It's very underground and, kind of what you expect from kind of underground, kind of independent promotions. But yeah, Terry.
It wasn't set up then? It wasn't just like it wasn't like a promo? Or...
I think there's an element of it being set up, but maybe some of what they do is a bit shoot. Like the slap, there is no doubt in my mind that is a real slap. Like, and to the point after where you can hear Terry saying, "I can't hear out of my ear," like an old man would, like he doesn't know the camera's on, and he's saying, "I can't hear out of my ear. I can't hear out of my ear. You son of a bitch." And yeah, but during this scene as well, Terry, because this other guy has just like pummeled him, and then he's shouting to like the people in the audience or the press or whoever it is, and he's saying things to them, and then turns around and Terry, with the framed picture he's just been given, decides to smash it full pelt over this guy's head. Real glass. Yeah, the guy goes down, and then he proceeds to, using the remainder of this photo frame, to just smack the guy in the back with. Yeah, it just all gets a little messy. But yeah, I just look at that and I'm like, wow, like that's 10 years after the documentary where, he was talking about retirement then. And I know it happened a few more times in his career where it was like, oh, Terry's retiring. Oh no, a month later, no, he's doing the show again. I am pretty much 100% sure he's definitely retired now. But yeah, that clip is it's something to watch. But yeah, I'd say if you're squeamish at all, maybe don't watch it. Or if you just don't like seeing an old man being slapped full pelt in the face, don't watch it. But if you know wrestling, a lot of it is a work. But yeah, there's parts where even I winced. Like one of them slaps, I was like, man, that guy, like, how is he taking it? Like, but yeah, so but like I say, I'm not really up to date in recent years in what's been going on in Terry's life. I can imagine that he's probably living quite a painful existence. I know Mick Foley is. So
yeah, what's happened to Mick?
Mick's done really well. He carried on wrestling after the documentary for a good few more years. Retired, semi-retired, came back for a match, retired again. He's an author. He's a New York Times #1 bestseller for, I think, a few of his books that he's done. His first book was an autobiography. It's called Have a Nice Day. And it's fantastic. I read it when it first came out. I wasn't really into books, but it just gripped me from the get-go. And I would say, wrestling fan or not, it's a great book.
I would be interested in reading that, even though I'm not into wrestling, but I do like him as a person. His personality oozes.
Yeah, I really think you'd enjoy the book. I'd recommend it to anyone because, you don't have. It's funny, it's heartfelt at times, but also like he understands that it's not necessarily just wrestling fans that will read this book. So he explains quite a lot as well within like terminology and things. So if there's a point in the book where he is discussing wrestling related things and there's a word you're like, what does that mean? He'll have informed you on what that means in the book. But yeah, absolutely fantastic read. Would recommend it to anyone. But yeah, he's done lots. He's wrote children's books. He has an absolute fascination with Christmas and Santa, where like his beard's pretty grey now, and it became like a proper Santa Claus, one where he had to go to a school, like I guess like a wrestling school, but for Santas without the wrestling. I don't know how it works, but yeah, he loves it. He does stand-up comedy. He does stand-up shows, which I've not been to one, but I have friends who've been, and they said it was absolutely fantastic. The show was great. He was funny. A lot of it's like old road stories and things like that, stuff that wouldn't be on television, but more the kind of behind the curtain side, and just being on the road with like fellow wrestlers, and just different kind of crazy road stories. And I've always heard that after his stand-up shows, he'll do little meet and greets with the people at the shows as well. If they bring stuff along, he'll sign it for them. Just there's not enough good I could say about the man that is Mick Foley. Just absolute gentleman, soft-hearted, nice guy. Has done so much for charity as well. He still has good connections with the WWE. He's a Hall of Famer. And yeah, and he'll do a thing like WWE's biggest show of the year is their WrestleMania show. And he does a charity event where you get full tickets to that show. You donate. I forget what the cause is. I think the name of the charity is Rain or something like that. The one that I've seen him do it for. And I believe it was to help victims of like physical abuse, like females, and that of domestic abuse and things like that. But yeah, like you would donate to that and you have a chance of winning your flights paid for, whether you're from the UK, the US or wherever, to the WrestleMania show. I think a week in the area, in the world that it is, like accommodation paid for, dinner with Mick and his family. Yeah, and all in the name of charity. Just all-round class act. All-round class act. I think one of his sons is younger. I think his youngest son has autism, and he's a big advocate for spreading awareness for autism and all that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, couldn't say enough nice things. But yeah, that cell match basically finished Mick's career as the type of wrestler he was. It got to a point where he said he couldn't even, after that match, he couldn't even, not directly after it, but the months and year or two after it, he couldn't even get on his hands and knees to play with his children. He was in constant pain daily. I'm pretty sure he's had a number of surgeries since. A big thing for Mick was like in the later years, he put on a lot of weight. And I think with his ailments, with his joints, especially in his knees and things, a big factor was losing a lot of that weight, which would help him immensely with his pain. It wouldn't get rid of it altogether, but obviously the less weight you're carrying, the better for your joints. So yeah, he lost a lot of weight. I believe he done it through DDP yoga as well. So another success story there. And I believe he does stuff like DDP yoga to help with his pain. But yeah, I'd say Mick's in pretty much constant pain throughout his life now. And you noticed it, like that match was in 1998, and anything before that match, I mean, Mick had done dangerous stuff in his past, but nothing quite to that level. And yeah, like his wrestling style after that match completely changed. Even the way he walked, you could see like his body was broken, basically. Quite sad, and I'm sure Mick to a degree regrets it, because it did cut his career short. But in another sense, he doesn't regret it because that match kind of put him on the map in terms of WWE. But I do know that Vince McMahon, as well, in other documentaries that I've seen, Vince McMahon, once that match was over, apparently did say to Mick, Mick, you know, I respect you and thank you so much for what you've just done for our company, but never again. Like, never again. That's too much. Which I think, you know, is, I guess, kind of commendable. You know, you don't want somebody dying in there. It's, you know, it's a business at the end of the day, and Vince knows that. And he probably, a lot of people that have ever worked for Vince McMahon will always say that Vince McMahon will never put you into a situation of doing something that he wouldn't do first himself. And a lot of the times, if Vince asked you to do some sort of certain stunt, he would do it first. Just as a respect thing, I guess, or a safety thing. But obviously, yeah, Vince wasn't thrown off of a cell or thrown through a cell. Not something he would choose.
It was an
to
accident.
Do. Yeah, I mean, the first throw wasn't an accident; it was planned. But he had at least the table to kind of break his fall. But the second throw wasn't planned whatsoever. And yeah, I would say, yeah, it is unfortunate. Like, it definitely finished off his career, that match. It was kind of end game after that. But at the same time, I'm so glad that Mick was able to find something else after wrestling, because so many people don't. And that's where a lot of the trouble comes into their lives, especially if they've wrestled on a big scale. You go from, you know, having, I don't know, say 30, 40,000 fans chanting your name in an arena to living normal life and not having that. That's a very difficult thing for people. And that's a lot of the time where their lives fall into drugs, alcohol and all that, because they're trying to replace this feeling that they had. So it's always good within, you know, if you're in the wrestling business, to have contingency plan, to have a backup plan of, you know, not only for when you retire, but also for if you do get hurt and you're not able to do it anymore.
Which I guess leads me on to the last person I want to ask about is what happened to Droz?
Droz?
Yeah, Droz.
Yeah, Droz.
Sorry.
Yeah, he's still alive, but he's still paralyzed. He never walked again. It was in a matchup with a character named D'Lo Brown that the incident happened. It was a regular move of D'Lo's that he does. It was what I believe is a running power bomb, which, how to describe it? Difficult to describe. Anyone who watches wrestling will know what a power bomb is. So it's that, but running and kind of launching your opponent. But yeah, something didn't go right with it. And whereas with a power bomb, you are basically thrown back first from somebody's shoulders onto your back. Your back is supposed to land flat on the mat. And unfortunately, in this instance, Droz landed head first. Instant break of the neck, instant paralyzation. Yeah, really, really, really sad. Obviously, never wrestled again. I've seen interviews with Droz since in later years. He never held no grudge against D'Lo for what happened. I imagine in the first few years, it was kind of touch and go with him with how he felt, because his career was taken away. His livelihood was taken away. He had to completely change the way he lived his life, which can't have been easy. And I imagine for the longest time, he probably held on hope that one day he would walk again. But unfortunately, the paralysation is so severe that it was just never meant to be. But yeah, like I say, in interviews I've seen, he, Droz understands that, it's part and parcel of the business. He knew what he was getting into when he got into the business, and that, mistakes can happen. He knew that it wasn't a purposely motivated attack. It was just a split second of something going wrong in a match, and that's all it takes is a split second. As far as I know, he is living his best life he can. I think the WWE have helped out quite a lot with medical bills and, some form of compensation to the guy. And I believe he's, from interviews I've seen more recently, I believe he's in a good place. He's not bitter at all, which it would be so easy to be bitter about that situation. I've seen interviews with the guy that unfortunately, done the move to Droz D'Lo. And I think it really affected him badly. I think he said in interviews he was scared in matches for the next 2 or 3 years of any move he'd done. He would be overly cautious to the point where it didn't look real in the ring because he was being overly careful because, to have done that to someone, it
must mess with your mind, doesn't it?
Time.
You'd think
you'd feel awful. You'd feel like you'd destroyed someone's life.
Yeah, you'd be stuck in what if, forever. Wouldn't you? It'd just be, the burden of that would just be horrible.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. It'd be like I could only put it the same as a police officer or something in America where they had to use a weapon or accidentally used a weapon and it killed someone that they wasn't meaning for that to happen to, and then having to live with that for the rest of their lives. It's horrible. But yeah, as far as, I haven't delved deep, but from what I know, Droz and D'Lo still talk to this day. They've met each other at meet and greets, and they're always good and jovial with each other still, which I think it speaks to the character of Darren Drozdov, because I know a lot of wrestlers, they hold grudges, and especially with something like that. But it speaks to his character, and it speaks that he was, a lot of people would give up in that situation. That would be okay. I don't want to live anymore. The pictures I've seen of him more recently, he looks like a completely different person now. No hair. He's still got a beard, got kind of a cool, funky beard going on. But yeah, that's about as much as I know, really, is just the fact that, I'm sadly and unfortunately, he didn't come back from that. It was a career-ending injury, to which there are many throughout pro wrestling. And it's always very, very sad. But it is part and parcel of the job, unfortunately. And again, why it is so very, very important that if you get trained to wrestle, you try and find the best trainer you can, because even the best trained people can make mistakes. And, that's the type of arena where, the slightest mistake could mean the biggest and worst outcome. So yeah, just if you do get trained up, get trained properly.
Oh yeah, I'm just seeing a picture here of him in his wheelchair that looks like a giant tank.
Yeah.
It's massive. It looks like it could easily zip across all kinds of fields and country and stuff. It's got like a kind of caterpillar, like like how tanks have the wheels, I
Yeah.
guess caterpillar track things.
Mhm.
The person who created Under Armour,
Mhm.
had that made for him.
Yeah.
Which was pretty cool. Anyway, so I think that is the end of our podcast for this week. It's been good. I mean, I feel like I've learned lots about pro wrestling from this
Like
that I didn't know before. It's really opened my eyes.
Well, like I suggested to do this documentary. One being it's a documentary I grew up with. Before I had any kind of discovery of some of the great documentaries I've seen since. Obviously, wrestling being a huge part of my life. When that documentary came out, it was kind of pulling back the curtain a bit, which was just fascinating to me, because I'd always witnessed wrestling as the show, like what they put on the TV screen, never really the behind the scenes stuff. And yeah, it was just amazing to see like the interactions and things of these people, and that the fact that they are real people. They're not necessarily the characters they are on the TV. They're real, they're human, they have emotion, they have family, that they have struggles like anyone else. But yeah, so it was kind of a big deal to me growing up, and then throughout the years, like following Jake the Snake and his journey, and learning about his view on the documentary, and like kind of that making me think like, wow, yeah, it kind of does feel like he was taken advantage of a bit there. But yeah, like my reason of kind of like pushing to do this documentary was knowing that you're not a wrestling fan, you've not it's not been a massive part of your life. Just to have two different takes on it, and like I always find it fascinating to find out like someone else's views on things. And because a lot of the time if I talk to a non-wrestling fan, it's fake, there you go, job done. They don't want to talk, or they won't delve deeper. So it's just interesting for someone who's not a fan to get a kind of inside look, to as much as that documentary would show, and to have a contrasting opinion maybe, or things you might not have understood that I might be able to answer. I just think it's definitely an interesting way to do this podcast, because there are two kind of we come from very different places when talking about it. So yeah, I just figured it'd be an interesting one to do.